Hey everyone! In today's video, I'm going to show you how I recreated these two Anthropologie planters that I think are way overpriced and would never spend the amount of money that they cost for them. So the left one is called the Brass Spora Hanging Planter and it costs $218. The one on the right is a 3-tiered hanging planter and it is $178. Together that's almost $400. That's crazy, like I could get 4 air fryers with that. They're both really aesthetic though and can be easily recreated. So I'm going to be starting with the left one. To recreate this, I used a 14-inch metal macrame ring in gold, one of the white planters from this 3 set from Amazon. This guy is the MVP for this video because I also used it for the other planter that I'll be recreating. I love how they come ready with holes for hanging and also have a flat back for having it against a wall. I also used this metallic gold spray paint, a satin white spray paint, some pliers from our toolbox, and lastly, I was originally going to be using these wire snippers but ended up getting the wrong one, so instead we used a handsaw, which I'll show here. All of this, excluding what we already have at home, cost me $21, and to save $11 from that, you can skip the spray paint. So the first thing I did was spray paint the planter with this satin white spray paint. I did this to make the planter look more matte and modern. The original Anthropologie one is made of stoneware and I wanted it to look as similar as possible, and I also do prefer that more matte look. When you're doing this, make sure you shake that spray paint really good and spray it at a good distance because if you're too close, you may add too much paint and it will get milky and drip downwards. I also placed the pot on top of this recycled bottle so that I can rotate it without having to touch the paint. Then I spray painted the ring gold to make it more brassy and upscaled. I felt that the original gold color looked really yellow and cheaper than the Anthropologie one. The Anthropologie one actually also has a yellower tone, but I went with this paint because I wanted it more cool toned and less shiny. I did regret spray painting first though. I recommend doing this after cutting and bending the ring because I had to come back and repaint to cover some scratches up. I waited overnight for the paint to dry. The next day, I measured the diameter of the pot to determine how much of the wire to cut off. The diameter was 4 inches, so I marked 3 inches of the ring to give half an inch on each end of the wire to bend and hook onto the planter. I hope that made sense. This next step was physically difficult and my fiance had to take over. As I mentioned earlier, we ended up using a handsaw that we had at home. When you're sawing, keep it steady on top of a platform. It also helped for both of us to hold the ring down against the platform. Afterwards, he bent it on each end at about half an inch using pliers. We gave it about a 90-degree angle so that it can be easy to hook on the pot but also sharp enough for it to stay on. This part requires a lot of strength. I couldn't do it. I wonder if you could use a hammer to bend it in. I was a little afraid to try that and break it, so if you think you know of a better way, please let me know below. Then I hooked on the planter, and voila! I love how this turned out. It looks just like the original. So simple, all I needed to do was just get the right parts and tools. I added this little pothos in it. It would look so pretty if the vines started cascading down. And I'll show it now side by side with the original Anthropologie one. Let me know what you think. Moving on, we're going to create the 3-tiered planter. Here's what you'll need for this one. I used the same 3 hanging planters off Amazon. I forgot to note that they do come with hanging ropes, which I just removed. A 50-inch long, 1-inch wide vegetable tan leather. I chose it in this lightest color. The same pliers, which I ended up not needing, but you may want to keep it aside to twist the hex nuts. 6 carriage bolts, 6 hex nails, and I was going to use this small nail to heat up and poke holes in the leather, but I ended up using a small knife instead. You can also use a leather hole puncher if you have one at home. And lastly, the same white spray paint. So first I spray painted the pots white like I did with the other planter. Then I spray painted all of the bolts and nuts gold. I let those dry overnight. Once dry, I laid out the leather strap and the pots to determine how far apart to hang the pots. Consider what kind of plants you want in here when doing this. I settled on 8.5 inches to ensure that the top hanging part of the leather is a little longer than the spaces between each pot. I also held the bolt against the leather strap to determine how much of the strap I wanted dangling below the lowest bolt. After measuring, I marked all of the spots where the bolts would go through. This next step was tedious but well worth it. I hadn't bought a leather hole puncher because I wasn't sure whether I would be needing it for future projects, so I used a small knife instead. I did try heating the nail and poking a hole with it, but I think the nail was too short and hard to handle, so what I did instead was twist the knife at each hole in circular motions until the hole was big enough for the bolt. This worked surprisingly well, and now I know that I can do this if I ever want to add an additional hole to my belt. I switched up the motion so that I was evenly scratching the sides, and I also did this from the back and from the front of the strap to even out the hole. It probably took me about 15 to 20 minutes to get all of the holes. I also had a ceramic plate upside down as a platform so that the knife doesn't scratch up the table. And once the holes were in, the rest was straightforward. I inserted the bolts and screwed the nuts to tighten the leather strap and pots together. And I love how this turned out. I was iffy at first about the leather strap being too light, but I think it goes really well with the golden bolts. I took some photos and shots with the same pothos plant. This would also look so cute with 3 different herbs by a window where you get plenty of sunlight. And now I'll compare them side by side with the Anthropologie one. So that is it for this video. I'm glad these turned out so well and I hope you enjoyed watching it. I'm curious which planter you prefer. I'll add links to all of the products that I mentioned below, and let me know how you like this kind of video. If you'd like to see more like it, give this a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you in my next one.